Cinderella, the story of the kind girl. Once upon a time, in a faraway kingdom, there lived a kind and beautiful girl named Cinderella. She lived a happy life with her loving father, but after her mother passed away, her father remarried. Her new stepmother brought two daughters of her own into the household. Unlike Cinderella, who was gentle and kind, her stepsisters were selfish and cruel, much like their mother. Cinderella's father passed away unexpectedly, and from that moment, her life changed dramatically. Without her father to protect her, her stepmother turned the household into a place of misery. Cinderella was forced to live in the attic, in a tiny, cold room. She had no fine clothes or beautiful shoes like her stepsisters. Instead, she wore rags and did all the housework. Her once beautiful hands became rough from scrubbing floors and doing laundry. Though her life was filled with hardship, Cinderella remained gentle and kind. She never complained, and she continued to dream of a brighter future. Cinderella's only companions were the animals in the house and garden. She spoke to the birds, and they chirped back at her as if they understood. She fed the mice, who in return kept her company while she worked. Despite her harsh circumstances, Cinderella treated everyone with love and respect, and her kindness was returned by the creatures of the house. One day, the kingdom was abuzz with exciting news. The king had decided to host a grand ball at the palace. The prince was to choose a bride, and every young woman in the kingdom was invited. Cinderella's stepsisters were beside themselves with excitement, dreaming of the chance to marry the prince. They spent hours and days preparing their dresses, buying the finest materials, and having their hair styled. Cinderella, too, dreamed of going to the ball. She watched as her stepsisters excitedly discussed their outfits, and though they treated her cruelly, she couldn't help but feel a little hope. She longed to go to the ball, not to meet the prince, but simply to experience a night of joy and magic away from her dreary life. When the day of the ball arrived, Cinderella worked tirelessly to help her stepsisters prepare. She sewed their dresses, polished their shoes, and even styled their hair. Her stepsisters, in return, mocked her. "You're just a servant, Cinderella. You could never go to the ball looking like that," they sneered. Despite their cruelty, Cinderella asked her stepmother if she might be allowed to go to the ball. Her stepmother looked at her with a cold smile and said, "You may go if you finish all your chores and find something suitable to wear." But Cinderella's hope was crushed. She had no dress to wear and knew her stepmother would give her endless chores to ensure she wouldn't have time to prepare. As her stepsisters and stepmother left for the ball, Cinderella sat by the fireplace, tears streaming down her face. She had worked so hard and was left alone, without even a chance to attend the magical event. Suddenly, a warm, glowing light filled the room, and before her appeared her fairy godmother. "Why are you crying, my dear?" asked the fairy godmother gently. "I want to go to the ball, but I have no dress, no carriage, and no way to attend," Cinderella replied, wiping her tears. The fairy godmother smiled kindly and said, "You shall go to the ball, my child. But you must remember, the magic I use will only last until midnight. When the clock strikes 12, everything will return to its original state." With a wave of her wand, the fairy godmother transformed a nearby pumpkin into a magnificent carriage, and the mice who had been Cinderella's friends were turned into splendid horses. Next, she waved her wand over Cinderella's tattered clothes, and they transformed into a beautiful gown of shimmering silver and gold. On her feet, Cinderella now wore a pair of delicate glass slippers, unlike anything she had ever seen. Cinderella could hardly believe her eyes. She looked down at her gown, twirled, and marveled at her transformation. The fairy godmother reminded her once again, "Remember, my dear, the magic will wear off at midnight." Overjoyed, Cinderella climbed into the carriage and was whisked away to the royal palace. As she arrived, the entire court gasped at her beauty, for no one had ever seen a young woman so radiant. The prince, who had grown bored of meeting the other guests, saw Cinderella and was immediately captivated. He asked her to dance, and as they waltzed together, he could not take his eyes off her. Cinderella felt like she was in a dream. For the first time, she was treated with kindness and respect, and the prince was charming and attentive. She had forgotten all about her cruel stepmother and stepsisters, who didn't even recognize her in her beautiful attire. The night passed in a blur of dancing and laughter, but soon Cinderella noticed the time. The clock was about to strike midnight. In a panic, she pulled away from the prince and ran from the ballroom without explaining. As she dashed down the grand staircase, one of her glass slippers slipped off her foot, but she didn't stop to retrieve it. She jumped into her carriage just as the clock struck 12. The magic faded, and her carriage turned back into a pumpkin, the horses back into mice, and her beautiful gown back into rags. Cinderella ran home, out of breath but full of joy from the magical evening she had experienced. The next day, the prince was determined to find the mysterious woman he had danced with. He sent his servants throughout the kingdom with the glass slipper, ordering them to try it on every young woman until they found the one whose foot fit perfectly. The servants went from house to house, but no one's foot fit the delicate glass shoe. Finally, they arrived at Cinderella's home. Her stepsisters eagerly tried on the slipper, but it was far too small for both of them. Just as the servants were about to leave, Cinderella appeared. Her stepmother and stepsisters laughed, insisting that she wasn't even at the ball, but the prince's servants insisted that every woman in the house try on the slipper. To everyone's amazement, the slipper fit Cinderella perfectly. Her stepsisters gasped, and her stepmother was speechless. The servants brought Cinderella to the palace, and when the prince saw her, he knew she was the woman he had fallen in love with at the ball. Cinderella and the prince were soon married in a grand ceremony, and she forgave her stepsisters for their cruelty. They lived happily ever after, and Cinderella, who had always remained kind despite her hardships, became a beloved princess who was known for her generosity and grace.